Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Before we begin, I would love to have our panelists introduce themselves. So we'll start right here. Sam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. I am Ranjini Sampath Kumar, and I go by Sam. I'm a founder and a consultant at Finesse Consulting. Glad to be part of this panel with amazing.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Jeff Bowman. I was actually on a panel yesterday, so for those of you that were there, hello again. CEO and founder of the AIMS Institute.
Hi, I'm Nadine Zainoun, and I'm the founder of Coach Nadine Zainoun Inc., and it's a training and coaching organization. We mainly work with teams, either teams or with executives who are leading teams to support them in developing their emotional intelligence and their conversational intelligence so that they can create better harmony among their teams.
My name is Milana Carroll. I'm the Chief People Officer of Fresh Consulting. We're an innovative consulting group that works in software, hardware, robotics, strategy, and design to solve problems that other companies just don't have the internal talent to do so. Thank you.
And I'm Kate Visconti. I think we went in alphabetical order there. I'm the founder and CEO of Five to Flow. We are a global collective of experts who help individuals access flow at work and help organizations put the processes and tools and people efforts into place to make that happen.
Thank you for that. All right, so let's kick this off with a little bit of a twist, shall we? So we're diving right into the heart of transformation. Can you share a pivotal moment or a project where you encountered some deep-seated resistance to change? And describe some of those strategies that you were able to employ. Sam, let's start with you. Okay, Jeff, let's go ahead and go to you.
I'm going to share Sam's story. No.
Yeah.
I will go back in time. It'd probably be about 12, 14 years ago. I was actually leading up a manufacturing company, a $200 million manufacturing company. And for several years, I faced some significant resistance. So what we would do is there's a select few of us would get together every year and we'd say, okay, what are the big things that we need to do as an organization for the next year? And we'd put our heads together and come up with those strategies and say, okay, let's go out and now convince everybody else that our ideas were the right ideas. So we'd attempt over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months to convince people to actually act on those ideas, and every year we seemed to fail. To the point where I was pretty worried about the company itself. And so what would naturally happen is, as we were rolling these out, trying to convince people that these were the right things, as soon as any kind of resistance came up, it was an easy out for people. It was like, well, we told you this wasn't going to work, or this was just another fad of the day type thing. And what had happened was, how we finally broke through it, someone had sent me an article on appreciative inquiry. And at the time, when I got the article, I thought, this is fascinating. Like, this is really cool. It seems to align to my DNA, but I have no idea what to do with it. And so I kind of leaned into a couple of the principles, like, I think I can adopt this, and I think I can adopt this. 2 of those being bring more people into the conversations and really honor strengths. And so we did exactly that. We brought a whole bunch of people into the conversation the next year to talk about those big things we were trying to do. We, 35 years in business at this point, identified what was working and built from there. And miraculously, we went from 200 million to 330 million the next year. We eliminated 5 warehouses, and we significantly improved efficiency on a couple of our different manufacturing lines. So bringing people in at the beginning was kind of the pivotal moment that helped us get through.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Sam, you want to see if your mic works?
I don't think so.
I'm happy to go without my
Okay.
So I'd like to share one of my examples. So as a consultant, you're always external. So whenever you consult with clients, there's always resistance. Like when you go into the teams, whether it's like teams that you're leading or projects, or you bringing the process into change. So it's like eating resistance for breakfast. So one of the projects that comes to my mind, which
That's really good. Nadine?
So one of the major resistance that I face in my work is when a company hires me to, for example, coach the executives, and some executives don't want to be coached. So that's a big resistance. They don't see the problem, they don't see the issue, they don't see that they need any development. So there was one company where I encountered like two really resistant people that were resisting coaching. And, you know, the HR and the management were, you know, telling me that, you know, these people are very negative, you know, they don't like anything new, you're going to have a problem with them, etc. So I said, okay, it's okay, let's see what we can do with them. And I think the main message that I want to give you is I did not take that judgment into consideration. So I freed myself from whatever judgment the HR was giving me or the executives were giving me, and I just sat with these people and I just said, okay, let me be curious. Let me just ask them, what are they resisting? I mean, where's the resistance? What is it they're worried about? Why don't they want to go into this? And I discovered like so many great fears that they are having, and it's coming from the lack of trust within the organization. And, you know, by doing that, I was able to win their trust, and then everything changed. And now they are probably two of my best clients that I work with. And the message here is get out of judgment and get into curiosity, get into really listening to these people and connecting with their stories and what they have, because every one of us has a story behind them. And, you know, this is what stops us. So when we connect on a human level, we can surpass that resistance.
Love that.
So I've spent the better part of the last 2+ decades working in the startup and scale-up space. So I was smirking a little bit because I've dealt with similar. If you have co-founders, the whole company's their baby, and it's very hard to create change. So we had certain things at a prior company where I called them sacred cows. We weren't allowed to talk about marketing, even though they don't know SQL to save their life. We cannot talk about this part of sales because of fill in the blank. And when I was looking at the senior leadership around me, they had learned helplessness. They were not like, nothing will change. Why do I speak up? So I needed to start finding people to be allies and find ways to amplify their voices so that they could see change could happen. And I would be right behind them, being that voice, making sure that what their idea was didn't automatically get thrown asunder, because that's what they were doing. They were watering down their opinions so that they might be heard, but then the executive team's completely out of sync with the organization. So by helping them have some of those like painful aha moments and leading them into whatever didn't work 5 years ago, we're a very different company, so shake that off, really changed so that we were able to make the right decisions to start pivoting instead of possibly losing our opportunity in the market space.
I like the Taylor Swift. Kate?
I was going with the Polaroid picture.
Oh, nice.
So my story of the biggest resistor was a large global technology implementation, something probably very relevant to a lot of people here. And one of the countries that was meant to go live decided weeks before go live that they were not participating, and it was a global CRM implementation. And when we dug into what had happened before the change team came on board to follow a really good model called ADKAR, where the D in the ADKAR acronym is desire, they were messaging to everyone why they would want to use this amazing tool, but they were using something that was the exact demotivator of the whole team. So the biggest learning for this organization in leveraging a change management model is it's not one size fits all, especially in the sales world. It's like everyone will have visibility of what you're doing, which is exactly what this team didn't want anyone to see. So it was an interesting learning for the organization, for our team to always apply customizing messaging on what's going to be the motivator and how to overcome resistance.
Thank you for that. And you've all talked about leaders, and Jeff, I know you've helped many leaders in organizations implement some pretty big strategies. So what are some of the strategies that you've seen that really helps leaders solve resistance before it happens? And what are some of the approaches that you've used to increase engagement?
All right, thank you. So I think I'll build on one of the sessions that I heard in another room today, actually, and it really comes down to when we think about change and we think about change initiatives, it's the people leading the change. And when we think about people leading changes, it's about leading the conversations that we're having, because it's a series of conversations as we go about trying to implement change or a process improvement, whether it's strategic, operational. And I think one of the highest predictors of success is that person's ability to lead those conversations in a way that are positive and productive. That person's ability to bring people into conversations so that they are committed to whatever the initiatives that you're trying to drive from the first place. And so I think, two big strategies that we use and that we teach others to use when it comes to leadership is, number one, bringing people in to the process right at the beginning, not waiting until you've come up with a plan. It goes back to the story I shared earlier. And the reason that's so important is you want to create that mutual commitment to the change itself, right? You've heard people talk about your why, you've heard people talk about purpose, but how do we bring people in instead of convincing them that this is the change that needs to happen, allowing them to have a conversation about it? You need an approach to do that, so we have to give leaders those skills to be able to facilitate those conversations in that way. But if I could give you one single piece of advice, it'd be bring people in and then facilitate a conversation that connects them to a shared purpose, that identifies what's worked and where they want to go with this. And when you do that, you create what we call as mutual commitment, right? And it's shifting from that compliance model that I tried that didn't work to a commitment-based leadership model that creates a totally different outcome for the rest of the project or the rest of the initiative. And so what we see is that when people are committed to one another and to the process, what they do is they use their creativity to solve problems as they come up. Whereas when you convince someone or you use that compliance-based model, people use their creativity, and people were all very creative. They use that creativity to get out of the things they didn't want to do in the first place.
The audience is not.
Right? And so that would be the first strategy. The second strategy I would say is, if you're the person leading the change, and if that's with your team or organization, or even for any of you that are working with clients, right, is how do you conduct these conversations in a way that people actually want to show up to? Right? How do you have positive and productive conversations? A really simple framework that we use when people come in is, and we try to have a generative frame to each of these conversations, but what have you done and what worked really well? Have everyone share that at the beginning, right? What are you doing? Right? So what have you done and what worked well? What are you doing and what support do you need from the team? Right? We create the cadence around that to really get people to talk about the things they committed to last week, what they did over the course of the week, how they brought their strengths in and what worked for them. And then at some other frequency is bringing people together to tap into their creativity, rapid brainstorming, design thinking, whatever methodology you want to use, but allow people to come up with new ideas that allow them to adapt as things happen in the project. I think those would be the two key takeaways for me as it relates to the changes that we lead with some of our clients.
I love that, because you're really talking about getting to the heart of why someone wants to do something. Almost, sorry for the pun here, but the root cause of it. And so, Melania, you really do a lot of work around root cause with your clients. And so even though it sounds like that would be a really no-brainer to do a root cause analysis, but you really have to think about profitability, strategic growth, or teaching IPO. However, I know it's not always commonplace and it's not always easy. So do you have any ideas to help people really understand why we really need to do this?
Sure. I'm a solver. That's usually frustrating to a lot of people in my life who want to just vent. And then I just come up with like 5 different possibilities and they're frustrated and walk away. So it does actually benefit me in the work world, however. But it's just been shocking. Some people just don't want the truth. I worked for this company that created algorithms for unsupervised data. So it takes the human error out and you actually have, here is the truth about what your customers are saying to you. And our customers stopped paying for the platform because it didn't validate their concerns and their narrative that they wanted about their data and their customers. They didn't want the truth. So that is a huge barrier to wanting to dive into root cause analysis. So there's so many different ways to think out, like, what are the different barriers? I'll go over like maybe two, and then we can give you some tools that have worked for me in the past. There's sometimes where, especially in the startup or scale up space, if someone leaves and that role is empty, you might throw an interim person into that role, and then you have a proximity permanent leader that you didn't plan on having, but you get comfortable with it. And I think we've heard multiple times throughout the past 2 days, being comfortable is usually a sign something's you're not pushing the status quo. So what do we do with that? One of the ways that I've noticed that, because it's very prominent in my current company, let's come up with a expiration for this timeline, and then let's look for indicators of success that this person is worthy of investing in, or is this not the right person and we need to get that visionary for, say, your chief growth officer, for example. Other areas is, where is there the will to actually change? I mentioned the idea of sacred cows. And sometimes people, again, like that unsupervised data, you don't care to know the truth that that part of the organization might be failing. So what I usually do is I lead with data, and I tell stories to get other people in the room, because if you're looking around and everyone else is seeing it differently than you are, you're the common denominator and you're probably part of the problem. So helping that person identify that and come to a place of humility and believing that you hired people around you to actually make you better, that usually helps them to move back into like their values of the organization, and not that whatever yesteryear was correct. So those are some of the ways that you want to get people to unhook their heels from whatever their original stance was and really do what's right for the business and what you actually want to do for your clients.
I love that. That's really great. And you're really talking about being innovative with your solutions and bringing people in. It really sort of ties into what all of you have been talking about. Sam, you really do a lot of things around project management. And so people don't think that's an innovative or creative space, but it actually is. So how do you balance the need for process improvement with fostering an environment that encourages that innovation and that creativity and really problem solving at the end of the day?
Great question. So when you consider innovation or creativity, it's almost contradictory to process improvement. If you fundamentally look at things, innovation and creativity is divergent thinking. And when you consider the process improvement, it's mostly deliverables and it's a convergent thinking. So there has to be a fine balance when you say, for example, consider product launch related projects, where you have innovation in the first part of the process, and then you have to launch, which is more of refining the process, and you have a lot of process improvement in place. One of the ways that I've seen that has worked in teams in terms of retaining the balance between the both is encouraging the teams to basically take risk and fail, because nobody tells the team it's okay to fail, it's okay to try. I've seen that really helps in terms of holding a safe space for them to be creative, come up with solutions, and really hold that platform. The other thing that I've seen during a process improvement or an implementation run, you have pockets of growth areas, what I'd like to call, where you have like quick fix, quick feedback and fix loops. And those can open up to brainstorming sessions or side projects, which can really encourage teams to think outside of the box, which can kind of integrate to have that fine balance between the both.
Thank you for that. So Sam just referenced the idea of failing and, failing quickly. And Kate, you and I have this in common. We deal a lot with the neuroscience of our fields. So what is actually happening in our brains and our bodies when we have ineffective processes, or we're not really allowed to fail or innovate? What goes on?
I think the interesting thing about that is everybody's mentioned one of the words that's a flow trigger, and a lot of us have mentioned the words that are burnout triggers. And the concept of neuroscience with all of this is, and I'll just ask for a show of hands, when is the last time you like to be managed? Nobody?
Yeah, I got
All right.
no hands in the room.
So in these contexts of a process being thrown at you, or you're told to follow a really old process, or you have a change impressed upon you, your cortisol levels increase. Anybody's face get hot when you read an email that something major is changing, or something you had zero input in, and you've got this adrenaline going, and you're in this state of struggle. In the flow cycle, what we need to recognize with that as an individual is I need a release before I lose it. Had this all been done right with words you've each mentioned, like creativity, safe space, innovation, understanding root cause, and build all this together, we could actually move to the flow state where you're releasing dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, other chemicals. And so the interesting thing about organizations, and I was going to make a joke that one I worked for years ago called the change management team arts and crafts, because there wasn't an awareness that there isn't just a feel-good feeling emotionally about positive change or engaging people in the change or giving them that autonomy to be part of the change. It's an actual physiological response. So it feels good to be part of the person who creates this idea. It feels good because we're releasing hormones. And as we get into the recovery stage and we're releasing oxytocin because we just had an amazing trusting engagement with people, we're releasing serotonin so we can actually feel happy at work. This isn't hippy-dippy or woo-woo stuff. It's actual science that many leaders don't understand. When they learn about it a little bit for themselves and start engaging people in, what do you think this process should look like? Or how would you create this? Or did you take a risk and fail? So I'll just end on one thing for Sam that my team and I talk about a lot, is a quote that I never know how to attribute properly because I just heard it on a Zoom. But if you fire somebody for failing, you're giving your competition that lesson learned. So I love to think about how we can engage people, keep them in a healthy state of mind to be super engaged, and manage everything with all the words you've each used as flow triggers.
I love that quote.
Can I add something?
Actually, I was going to come to you, so go right ahead.
Thanks. So I'm really happy that you brought up the trust and distrust thing and the hormones. So, there's something that we don't really know about trust, is that it's not just a good feeling, okay? It's about the hormones, the oxytocin that is secreted in our brain. So when we have conversations with people, we impact their neurochemistry. Their brain chemistry changes. And if there's a conversation that is building trust or behavior that is building trust, it allows this oxytocin to go up and the conversation goes very well. And there's no resistance. But when there is resistance, it means that there's distrust. So there's the cortisol that was just mentioned. So this distrust and this cortisol allows us, and please, I want to really highlight that even us, okay? Us who are trying to manage the resistance, we become resistant when our cortisol is high because this is a physiological response to the high cortisol. So high cortisol changes who we are as people. It allows us to become defensive. It allows us to become doubtful. It allows us to start protecting ourselves because we're scared. It brings up fear. So we're scared. We want to protect ourselves. And that's why in times of change, the resistance is there because people are feeling fear from this change. They're either afraid that maybe they're not going to be good enough to handle this change, or maybe they're just afraid that they might lose their strength because they were so good at the old process, and now there's a new process. Maybe I'm not going to be good enough, and people are going to see me as not good enough and let go of me. So all of these fears that come up in our mind, they create this cortisol, and that's why people resist. So the key here to keep in mind, if we want to change that resistance, we want to take them from distrust or fear into trust. And how can we do that? Conversations, empathy, listening, being curious, not judging them, as I was mentioning before. So thank you.
Yeah, I love that. And so we've all been kind of talking and skirting the issue a little bit because we've been talking about teams. How do we as leaders help teams? But there's someone on a team that we've addressed a little bit, but we really haven't. So Nadine, what's the impact of change on the leadership?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, because we always forget about the leader.
Exactly.
We're always so focused on, okay, how do we get the team to get their buy-in, et cetera. And we forget that the leader is also going through the change. And they're also experiencing the fear and uncertainty that the employees are feeling. However, what's really worse in the leader himself or herself is that they are not allowed to show the fear, because they have this belief that, as an executive, as a leader, I need to be a macho person. And I shouldn't show that I'm scared or I'm worried about something. But that's not true. Really, that's not true. Remove that pressure off your shoulders and allow yourself to feel the fear, feel the worry, feel the uncertainty, and acknowledge that. Say, embrace it. Say, okay, I'm going through that. And what is it about? What am I worried about? And just analyze what's going on inside you. Because, in that moment, you're really giving yourself very harsh words inside, but you're not aware of it. So just create that awareness about what's going on. What am I afraid of? What am I worried about? And once you discover that, you can address it. And then you can be more present with your team, because you already solved that issue yourself. So you can do it with your team as well. You can be much more empathetic with your team when you've already gone through it yourself.
Can I add on to that?
Please.
There's, so when we try putting on this stoic face of this is what a strong leader looks like, it actually worries your team if you don't show urgency and they see that there's the writing on the wall. They see you as inauthentic, and they see you as not in tune with the pains of the business, which is when they clean up their resume and they go somewhere else. So leaning into that into a way that is helpful, not distracting, because there's another way that people lead with either true authority or they come in, lead by friendship. If you lead in by friendship and you start to ruminate with your team, you're again taking away your power in a different way. So these are all different things too. It's a careful dance. It's hard. It takes a lot of years to get to the right spots, but we come with our scars, and that's why things like this are so important, so we can share.
Lana, I really like that point, because what you're really talking about is building that sense of having that psychological safety, that what I'm seeing is really what's really happening. And so this is a question for everyone to answer. But in the vein of building those psychological safe spaces where we can bring our scars, we can bring those fears, we can show our true faces, can you tell us a little bit about what are some specific techniques or tools that you have used with your clients or in your past lives within organizations that's really helped build that trust and that openness so that people do feel safe? So it's an open question, so anybody can jump in.
I'll give a chance to someone else.
Okay, good.
I'll share a couple quick experiences, because I'm trying to build off of what was said as well. I think as a male on the panel,
I didn't want to call you out, Jack.
thank you. Being vulnerable and authentic is, I think in my mind, at least for many years, I was like, I can't be seen that way. And what's required to do that is really just to step out of your comfort zone and do it. And so I'll share a really recent story. We lost someone very close to us, my father-in-law, about a month ago. Mm-hmm. And thank you. And I had to teach at the university a day after the service. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to be there. And I thought, I'm going to lean into something that I've learned, which is from someone named Gervais Bush, who really talks about, how do you use the experience cube to describe what you're experiencing in the moment. And so I leaned into that. And I was like, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to tell people what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. And as soon as I opened my mouth, I just broke down. Mm-hmm. I couldn't even get it out. And what I think is most amazing, and this is, even though I talk about this stuff and even though we do it, we don't really understand the impact of it. And I mean, I had people encouraging me in the room, stepping into leadership roles, them bringing me, flowers the next week, and really connecting to me as a human being. Mm-hmm. I didn't lose my power, mm-hmm. right, to the points that were talked about, but I showed them that I was willing to share what I was experiencing. And I think that's really the important thing is, how do you as a leader share what you're experiencing in a way that allows you to connect with your people, to create urgency, to do the things that are required for the business, but they're really human at the same time. So I think, I mean, I wasn't planning on sharing that story, but it just kind of emerged to me. The other thing I'll build on really quickly is that, you know, I think I mentioned it before, people don't resist change. They resist the perception of being changed. And so for the longest time in the work that I didn't really understand why I was doing it, but they told me I should do it, which is to ask a question about what's worked in the past, like strengths. And so I would do it because I was told and it seemed to work. And then one time someone asked me the question, Jeff, why do we do that exercise? I'm not even sure how it fit in. And I reached out to a colleague and said, why do we do that exercise? Because I didn't have the answer. And it comes from positive psychology, right? If people are resistant to change, they're resistant to being changed, they're not resistant to change because we all change every day. When we ask a question that allows people to bring in what's worked and what that they've been at their best, it taps into positive emotions. So when it taps into positive emotions, it allows them to be open to what it is you're trying to move towards. So that was something I really leaned into in my ability as a leader to do those things. And I think I'll just leave it at that. There was something else I was going to say, but it doesn't apply to the question I'm going to do.
No, those are really good.
I'd like to add a tool.
Yeah.
Our team uses a tool called the Enneagram. If you've not heard of it, it's spectacular. There's also I Love DISC and the Motivation by Appreciation. And all three have helped our teams see that you can't say the exact same thing or approach things, or how people hear things is very much a lens that I was in a session yesterday about here's the message, and I have to make sure how it's received is based on how that person's going to perceive it. Word choices, understanding their key motivators and key fears. And on our team, we all know everyone's Enneagram type, and we'll reread and pre-read and prepare and do working sessions on how to best communicate specific things, because that perception is their reality. And if we're not using a tool that really helps you come at something or with someone to work with them in a way that's going to be the exact demotivator or what have you, you're going to, again, get into that fight or flight or freeze type of state. So we love those tools very specifically. But everything you said, too, and the engaging people onto that positive side is, and one last exercise, when everybody's complaining about what they don't want to happen, I'm like, write that on the left side of the paper. And then on the right, write the opposite positive thing, and then tear this side off and keep this, because it's really hard to ask people what they want. They just really know what they don't, and it's a really easy exercise I even do for myself. So I love that one.
I love that. That's a really good one. Anybody else?
I think one thing that, you know, we don't need tools, outside tools, you know, external tools with, is just listening. Connecting with people.
That's a tool.
Yeah, it is a tool, but I mean, it's something that we can,
Yeah.
we have.
We don't have to buy it.
Yeah, we can do, okay? Because we're all capable of listening. We all have 2 ears, so we are capable of listening. So, but it's difficult to listen because we're so fast-paced and we're always rushed. And we feel like if we want to stop and listen to people, it's going to take time. So it's easier to just pretend I'm listening or just give orders or whatever. But that doesn't work. It doesn't create trust. So if I really want people to trust me, I need to, first of all, be aware of their body language and their emotions. So if I sense that somebody is not too okay, maybe his face is not okay, or the way he's sitting, or maybe he's breathing, I don't know. But if you sense that there's something not too okay, it's important to stop whatever you're doing and just be curious about that and just ask them what's going on. And here, you know, you mentioned how you like to solve things. Don't solve their problem. Just listen. And this is something we fall trap of. So we think that we're listening, but we start giving them all these options. Go do this, go do that. Oh, I've been through this situation. This is not what they need. All they need is someone to connect with their feelings and just say that, I hear you. I'm with you. I understand you. That's it. Yeah. You don't have to solve anything because they are capable of solving it themselves. It's just when you empathize, you just open up that prefrontal cortex. You open up that brain that can solve the problem, and they'll find the solution.
Now, granted, sometimes we are paid to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just want to build off what Nadine said because I think it's really important. And there's an exercise we do with leaders where we say you have 10 minutes to interview someone. We give them a couple of questions. We say the rule is you can't offer your own advice, experience, or wisdom. You just have to listen and probe and ask further. Be really curious. And the lesson that I pull from that is, when we're listening, are we listening to learn or are we listening to respond? And my encouragement is listen to learn. The reason I have this notepad and pen is because I know myself, right? I'm always thinking, and I know I can say this. I write it down, right? It's messy. Half the time I can't even read it myself, but if I write it down, I can let go of it and listen. And I think that's really important. Whatever tools you need, how do you be truly present in a conversation with someone when you're listening?
There's one thing I would add to this, and I'm very much yes, +1. But there's also, once you've gone from listening and there's no direction, that's where it turns into more of like a complaint fest. And then everyone leaves that conversation feeling worse. They might have a release, but they don't feel like there's a next step.
Right.
So you don't have to solve them, and you shouldn't, to your point, but you can help them get to the, okay, I hear you, and now what? How can we measure their success towards that now what step that we all agree that we need to do? How do we have accountability partners? Because I do that all the time. I love having focus groups. I like having them pure, asking the leaders to leave, because often we're the problems sometimes. So,
No, never.
but as soon as you get to the actual root cause, you do need to get to some sort of solutioning, even if you should not be the person doing it, making sure that you're enabling that type of solve-it mentality so that people don't stick there.
Yeah, you're right. It sounds like, too, what you're saying, which I really love, is that you're building that skill of execution, right? That we listen, we work through it, and then we execute on that, which I really love that. And so with that, I'd love to sort of talk about in our final moments before we open it up to questions, lessons learned, right? So what are some of the lessons as you look back, because we've talked about failing and then taking that lesson and learning it. So as you look back, what's the one lesson that you've learned the hard way on leading process improvement? And how has it shaped your approach today? It's an open question. Okay. Open question.
I can start. I can say that what I learned, and that was like a big mistake for me, and I still do it, but I have more awareness now, is that what stops my listening is my assumptions. So I assume. So somebody, even with my daughter, not even at work, so even with my daughter, she's coming, telling me something, I assume that this is the reality of the situation. And when I do that, I just stop listening. I'm no longer there. I stop listening and I start accusing her. And I think that, and it took me time to notice that, oh my God, I'm judging her, I'm making all these assumptions. But when you really discover that you're judging and you notice that and then you stop yourself and you keep that distance, everything changes. So my lesson is be careful, judgment creeps in. Our mind loves to judge and hold on to that reality. It's not a reality. It's just our perception of things. So stop yourself and get into curiosity and ask the person what's going on. How do they see it? What's their reality of things? So that you can really connect well, and then things move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I'd like
Sam?
to add upon what she has just mentioned upon. Usually we, like my biggest lesson learned in terms of this would be, usually we all come up with our own standards and view of the world or way of patterns of looking at things that may not be in alignment with how somebody else may look at it. So I think to sum up, like some of the items that we've discussed, one is active listening that could get you out of this trap where you're actively taking notes and reiterating to them, is this what you mean? Because if you put an elephant, everybody is going to look at it from a different perspective in the room. Right, so I think that's major key message. Another thing based off of being vulnerable and being able to courageously show that after you've processed that you are with them, gives them also hope that you are in the same table, not on the opposite sides when you're leading teams. And I think that is very important for building the trust and the relationship with them when you have like a long project or a long tenure in terms of leading something.
I can go. Mine is a little humorous. For those of you who do know the Enneagram, I'm a 7, which is the eternal enthusiast who thinks everything's an adventure. So sure, I'll speak on stage about IoT when that is not my position, or every team member I've ever managed, I'm like, what's the next big thing for you? And they're like, can I just do this, please? And so my approach, I did the same thing when I worked at a pizza shop. I like lots of sauce and cheese, so I'm putting way too much sauce and cheese on everyone's pizza, and everyone complained. So trying to deliver what I think I would want has been a huge learning with the Enneagram, with a couple of other things. And what I consider as a major adventure is literally someone else's personal absolute worst experience. So I feel like really getting to know an individual at their heart and being able to lead with that, and then using those tools that you can't get your customers to do the Enneagram or what have you, but you can start seeing those things and augmenting. Another example is with DISC and communications. When I left an employee a voicemail and I said, it's Kate, call me back. And I got on a flight and he calls me back 4 times while I'm on the flight, leaves all these panic voicemails, and I call him back. And I was like, congratulations, you got promoted. And he's like, oh my God, I thought I was getting fired and I'm freaking out. And why would you leave this message? And I'm like, well, I'm a high I. I just said I needed you to call me. And he's an S, which is the like ask and very people oriented. And all those lessons, he loves that I always tell that story as an example of you have no idea how differently people want things, see things, need things until you start putting these tools into place.
So you left that guy for like 4 hours thinking he lost his job.
He was so sure he was fired and it was a promotion. So
Very nice, very nice.
Since you said melty cheese, I have a cheese problem, and I'm just salivating. Well, kind of on that, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was so happy this was the first book I read. It was Viktor Frankl's Man's Quest for Meaning, and it's all about no matter what is going on, how dire it might be in your business, in your world, if you can just step out and find some way to reframe it, you're not lying to yourself. You're just finding a more healthy way of looking at that dynamic in front of you. And then you model that for the people around you. So whether it's your partner's kids are looking nervously at you, or your team is looking terrified at you as the executive going through an acquisition, whatever that is, just be mindful you can control yourself. You cannot control everything else. And if you believe in how you're authentically showing up, then hopefully that resonates.
I love that. Jeff?
Well, how do we simplify this into one lesson? Here's what I'll say is you've heard a lot of people talk over the last couple of days about here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to do. And I think in this day and age, the what isn't up for debate. And there's lots of tools out there for what we need to do, whether it's drive change, whether it's implement a management system or a business system. But many of those things and what people are trying to do is to simplify versions that have been created years and years ago. And what you're hearing from the panel and what I would advocate for is what we need is a different how. And so if you're leaning into an approach for how you lead, how you drive change, implement a management or business systems, look for a different how. One that allows you to set the table for people to authentically share and then move those questions generatively forward based on where the group needs to go.
I love that. I love that. There's a lot of lessons. I know many of us do this for a living, but it's always good to hear other people's perspectives on things. So if you've got any questions or comments, please go to the mic and we'd love to hear from you. I have a great group of people willing to answer. Hello, sir.
So for the panel, we talked a couple things about making sure we don't forget about the leader. The question is, who's there to help the leader? Because again, the leaders are supposed to act a certain way and think a certain way, and you can't share all that stuff with the team. So who should they be going to is what I was curious what you guys thought.
So who should they be going to? Jeff, do you
There's
have,
probably a
do you
lot
have a
of-
response?
Yeah, there's probably a lot of people in this room they can go to. But, and I think there's a panel on this tomorrow, right? Like, a leader needs to be learning and have people they're learning from as it relates to the changes they're trying to drive. So find a group that they can learn from. If you're investing in a training program or leadership development, or even internally, make sure that you're pairing that person up with someone who has the skills to help them drive those changes. And then, the other trend I would say is there's lots of peer groups out there now, right? There's lots of peers, as CEOs, we go to Vistage or we go to other groups like that because we feel lonely, we need someone else. Create those groups internally in your organizations if you're big enough. Or if you're a consultant or a coach, how do you create those peer groups inside of organizations to enable them to have that support mechanism to work through the challenges that come up?
Yeah, I'll just add to that question. One of the things that we do is we give the leader their own coach. We don't pair them with any other coach that's in the organization because of the fact that sometimes within an organization, a leader may have things they don't want to share with other employees as well, depending on the size of the organization. So if you can find a way to give them someone that's just theirs, and then to sort of piggyback of what Jeff said, is really, when you're going into organizations, make sure that you are sharing networking groups that they can join that have like people in them. That's the point. We need to have a community, and peer work, just to get a little nerdy on the neuroscience, which Kate will agree with, peer work really requires us to teach someone else, which also means that our retention goes up by 90 to 95%. Anybody else want to jump on
I'll
that?
add to it as well, to what you basically just alluded to. Outside of time for professional development, it's giving leaders time to just shut off. And so many organizations, you're expected on vacation to answer emails. And I'll never forget a lesson. I was in Leadership Columbus in 2010, and we're all sitting there and everyone's playing with their phones and catching up and checking emails. And she said, if you don't have time to unplug, you're a terrible leader. And we all were like, what? And she said, do you trust your team to run the business while you're gone? And when you leave here and you take a day off, if you're reading email and your team sees it, if you're on Slack and your team sees it, trust goes down. Because our boss can't even take a vacation because he or she thinks we can't even do this. Yeah. So please take vacations. Please shut the phones off. Please do a digital detox whenever you can to refresh yourselves, and take a walk in nature at least once a week, if not every day.
Well, we will leave it at that. I want to thank, this is a really good one to leave it
Thank
at.
you.
So I want to thank the panel for these wonderful words of wisdom. And if you have a chance, talk to these people. They're amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie.